Hello and welcome to another Pure Theory Crafting for Marvel Avengers Alliance 2. Yes, I've been gone. I have not been around for the past week and a half or so. It's not because I had any problems with the game. It was very much just that I was incredibly busy outside of it and have not had the hours needed to sit down and make these videos, make these posts. These are not Putting these together is not really a short process. It does take several hours for each one of them. I am not the fastest typist, and most of these videos take about 3 or 4 takes before I do the entire thing. There have been 2 extensive patches since the last time that I was made a video. I'm going to touch on those before I go a little bit further because they change some of the characters that I have done and some of the characters I will be doing. 1.2 most notably changed Gamora so that you can no longer chain her opportunistic finishing move one after another. It does add a cooldown to it. It fixes Nebula, the very first video I did for Pure Theory Crafting. It does fix her passive. Instead of the broken Father's Training that was supposed to give her stealthy as soon as she hit 5 combo points, now she gets a free turn immediately. And that's a power buff. That's very big for her. Where Gamora always had the ability to hit 5 combo points after her second action, Nebula does need 3 turns. She still does to get her 5th combo point. But as soon as she gets that 5th combo point, she gets a bonus turn right then and there. Meaning that both of them can now unleash a 5-point finishing move on turn 3. Because Nebula is essentially getting 2. This also may increase the speed, especially the speed, but the overall viability of Nebula's shock build versus her melee build. Her melee blunt build really needs the ambushing status to complete in order to get those last combo points, and so she's not going to get that bonus turn until the ambushing status ends. With her shock build, her finishing move not only comes available right at turn 3 because she gets the points immediately, but her finishing move actually has a opportunistic, allowing her to potentially get her not just her 4th turn, but her 5th turn in a quick consecutive 3-4-5 order right there, 3 turns back to back, with no pause in between them. And this is a pretty severe speed increase. I'm really looking forward to, once I've kind of tapered down here, actually getting the chance to play with her and test this new set out. I invested pretty heavily in Nebula. I believe the only thing she's really missing to keep her from being 4-star is the 3,000 AP needed to do that last trial. She's already got enough 3-star abilities to get her 4th character star, so I'll probably work on her here shortly. I just haven't had the time recently. As of just a day or 2 ago, maybe even last night, I've slept since then. I can't quite remember. It's been a hectic week. Rocket has been heavily nerfed. Specifically, all characters that use ammo have been nerfed, but it was really kind of aimed at Rocket, and it's been coming for a while, and let's be honest, it was a bit necessary. You shouldn't be able to one-shot the entire enemy team. That's why they nerfed Ballerina. This does mean that any videos that I've done for characters that use ammunition, which I think I've really only done for Iron Man, I'd have to look back at the list, but also Winter Soldier. There's been some fluctuation in damage numbers. But at the same time, while they did some nerfing to those who use ammo, they increased the damage while slightly decreasing the speed of extremely fast moves, which I have read results in Winter Soldier being just as powerful as he was before, because those extremely fast moves are now doing equivalent damage. He's maybe a hair slower with them than he was initially, but he's still a completely viable blaster from what I know. Most of the griping that I've heard has come from Rocket in PvP, and I've never really felt the need to use him there, and have never needed him to get to S rank. For this season, I got S rank yesterday, and I did it with 2 characters who were 3-star when I started. I did use my 4-star Moon Knight. He is a staple of my party, and I'm a big fan of him. Taking a look down here, that PvP season, about 2 days left on it, and then we get the reward. And the reward is the subject of today's video, Civil War, Black Panther. Before we get on him, he's down here on the screen, I'm going to point out something real quick. I have the 3 PvP heroes I was missing. I would not have spent the money, probably should not have spent the money, needed to actually buy them during that sale, except I wanted them available to do videos for this in the future. I do not feel like the value of those benefited me personally enough to justify the cost. Mainly because I've never had problems with Angela in PvP, so I don't feel that she is a end-all be-all PvP character either. But I did buy them because I felt that hopefully any videos I do for those characters down the line will benefit the community enough to have justified the money spent. $30, a bit much for a character to benefit just me. But $30, if I can benefit multiple other people who watch a video for that, that I can stomach. That's okay. But not everybody's going to do that. So, played on. Maybe drop the price down a little bit next time. Civil War, Black Panther. He is an infiltrator. He is like his other model there. He's similar in overall design, but I like this one better. There's a little more detail in the blacks and the grays. I like the color. I like the stripes and the piping. It's a better character model. I'm pleased. There are some character models that don't necessarily look that great. I like Black Panther in this one. Let's take a look at his stats. Again, level 1. He's not released. There are some limitations on what we can view. Speed, 286. Accuracy, 286. Highest stats? That'll translate when he gets higher. That will. This is going to be a relatively high speed, relatively high accuracy. I don't think, looking at these stats, that we're really going to see those be super high. I don't know that they're going to hit 2,000 at level 33 star like some other characters do. I think they're going to hit like 1,900 and something. High, but not very high. Evasion, attack, those I think are going to be average. Defense, a little below average. Health, way below average. And that's pretty normal for an infiltrator. In fact, his attack is actually pretty respectable for an infiltrator. And that's good. We'll make use of that for him. We'll make use of it because of his capability for burst damage. Civil War Black Panther, while he was touted as having unique debuffs, and we'll definitely go over them and make use of them, he also has some great capability for burst damage. A quick look at his leader's bonus. 10% evasion and speed. These are fantastic stats. This is a PvP reward character by association, if nothing else. That's what people are going to think of when they look at him. Evasion and speed, great stats for PvP, and good stats for him. His passive and his resources, which, yeah, we have to scroll down for it because it's a little bit, but his resources, stamina, and insight always works with the passive. So we'll go over insight first. Insight fills as enemies take actions. Some insight users have tacticals that grant an additional amount of insight. Agent 13, for instance. If she's getting close, she can use her tactical to fill her insight bar a little bit faster. Civil War Black Panther can't do that. Insight for him is going to come from enemy actions, and that's it. But we're going to see as we get to his innate that he works just fine with that alone. On paper, obviously I haven't tested him yet, but on paper, because of his innate as we get to it, relying on enemy attacks for insight is not going to be a crippling thing for him. His passive is tied to insight. When it reaches 100 points, he gets a bonus turn. His attacks will gain a 50% damage bonus. Now, like many characters, his 2 big heavy nukes already have a couple of moves that do the plus 50% damage. This means that they're not going to increase by quite as much as you might think, but are still going to gain a very powerful damage bonus. They aren't low damage. They're not as high as some others, but we're going to take a look at that, and then they're going to get like 150% bonus on top of what we see. So Studied Strikes allows for a large increase to damage, but also allows him to choose stealthy and protected targets in that same turn, much like Daredevil does passively. And this allows him to go from debuffing specific enemies to a massive burst of damage against a single target. He's going to fill two roles in our team, and we'll see this as we go through his abilities. He is going to be an annoying little bastard when it comes to debuffing enemies, and that will be his primary purpose turn to turn. And then, in the middle of these, he's going to get an insight turn and result in a big single burst of damage before he goes back to debuffing enemies again. And I'm going to try to set him up that way because we're going to really have to manage his stamina. Stamina is the most common resource that I think I've seen in the game, possibly rivaled only by power, but even power users are maybe not quite as frequent as stamina. Stamina starts at 100, starts full, and it regens 40 per turn. That 40 per turn is important because Civil War Black Panther has no other way to boost it. Unlike Age of Ultron Black Widow, his insight turn does not say that it regenerates all of his stamina. We have to keep his stamina above a certain level in order to make the best use of those insight bonus turns. We have to really watch our stamina consumption with him because we have no other way other than maybe, spending a turn on his tactical to try to get a little bit more regeneration. That's it. That's what we've got. Looking at his abilities, we'll look at how we do this. Now, even as we open this first one, we're going to see a whole new tag. And this pleases me. This is a tag that has not existed before this character. Other debuffs that haven't existed have been added to the game with other characters. The Civil War characters, many of them brought completely unique debuffs that didn't exist before. But they didn't have a new tag. A tag represents a brand new category, a new direction for the game to go in. Right now, there are a grand total of 4 lockout moves in the game that I know of, and all 4 of them are possessed by Civil War Black Panther. And this gives me the hope that we're going to see similar effects appear in the future. We might find other lockout characters. We might find that enemies and specific bosses start using lockout moves. And this will introduce a more tactical element to gameplay that increases its difficulty. Makes it more of a strategic challenge in the way that the hero battles in Marvel Avengers Alliance 1 added to it there. Those hero battles were set up with specific gimmicks that made it so that it was if you figured out what the strategy was, you'd coast through it. And if you didn't, you were going to have a lot of trouble. And this represents the game moving in that direction. Now let's take a look at the move itself though. 50 stamina, melee, sharp, low damage, normal speed. As we go down, it does eventually reach fast, but even at fast, I try to say, give me 120 damage on a fast move. This doesn't reach anywhere near that. And we're going to see that that is a common trend among lockout moves for Civil War Black Panther. His lockout moves are there for the debuffs, not for the damage. More importantly, because we're not relying on damage, is the stamina cost. Here at 3-star, it hits 25. Shoot for that. Shoot straight for that. If you're going to use this move, take it straight to 3-star. Don't pause in between. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Aim for 3-star and ignore everything else on the way. We need to ensure that his most frequently used abilities are at or below 40 stamina. Close to it or below. Because we need high stamina for the damage burst for his insight rounds. Having 25 stamina allows him to gradually regenerate stamina between those insight turns. And he's going to get more insight turns than most other characters do. And we'll see that as we get all the way down to his innate. It's going to take us a little bit, but we'll get there. This move does apply bleeding. He is a sharp user. He does have a couple of unarmed moves. He has like 2 unarmed moves. But most of his big damage shots are going to be sharp. And they will all trigger bleeding. He cannot apply susceptible. So while he's capable of applying bleeding, he's not really a bleed focused character to the extent that Marvel Now Black Panther or Gamora are. Instead, this becomes useful to us because it's a physical debuff. And we'll see that he actually has a couple of ways, 3 or so different ways, to make use of having physical debuffs on the enemy. Only one of the 4 lockout moves is a physical debuff in its own right, and all of them have this shorter duration. This is the best physical debuff for him to spread along the enemy line in order to take advantage of it, which makes this a good core starting move despite its low damage. But let's talk for a moment on lockout debuffs. Flustered is one of what I consider 2 minor lockout debuffs. There are 2 minor and 2 major, and they represent the 4 main categories of attacks in the game. All attacks they're either going to have the attack tag or they're not. One of the lockout moves affects any move that doesn't have an attack tag because it's labeled non-attack abilities. So buffs and debuffs are going to be the focus of that one, as well as like tacticals. All tactical moves are buff or debuff. They're not attacks. All attacks are further split into melee or ranged. There is a lockout move for melee. There is a lockout move for ranged. In addition to these, because buff, debuff, melee, and ranged are the 3 big categories for manually activated abilities, there are also free attacks. And what we're looking at on the screen right now is the lockout for those free attacks. It reduces their damage by 75%. This is a big drop. But it's also identical mathematically to off balance. Additive effects in this game, percentage-based effects in this game stack additively. So if the enemy has thrown off balance on you, and you put flustered on him, my apologies for the siren. However, I'm not going to restart the video and go again. You guys can just worry about who the police were chasing after in your own time. Okay, back to what I was doing here. Flustered, which is me right now. There's some irony in this. Anyway, back to the screen. 75% when you have off balance on you is going to result in normal damage for free attacks. Off balance is a critical part of free attack teams. Only a few people, such as Moon Knight with his Lunar Punishment, or Age of Ultron Hawkeye. These are good examples of characters with very strong free attacks. Most characters, even those who use them frequently, like Luke Cage or Iron Fist, have relatively weak free attacks. Their damage comes in their ability to apply off-balanced and to spam the attack over and over and over again. This really is going to mess up free attack teams, especially on a spammable ability for 25 stamina. This is what Lockout is meant to. This is what the Lockout moves are really meant to do: to cripple an effective portion of your opponent's strategy. Moving to the next 1-star ability, Cloaked Ambush. This is the first of 2. Technically, he has 3 fairly high damage moves, but the third one is not really the same. This is the first of 2 70 stamina moves, and in both of them, we see this. Starring up the ability increases the damage, and has no effect on its speed, or its stamina cost, or its debuffs. Neither one really has debuffs. Both of them have properties, but they don't have debuffs. These are burst damage moves that are designed, I won't say that they always need to be, but they're obviously designed to be used during the insight turn for that massive burst of damage, the 50% additional damage, and the ability to pick your target past protection, past stealthy. That's where you would send this one off. Now, both of them have 2 properties, and both of the 70 stam moves have exploit weakness. Bleeding is a physical debuff. And both of them are melee sharp with a slow speed. In fact, they're very similar. They are very similar moves. There is one noticeable difference between Cloaked Ambush and his 3-star ability, and that is where his 3-star, and we'll get to that towards the end of this, has a second plus 50%. This one has armor piercing. The higher the enemy's defense, the more damage this is going to deal. I'm not entirely certain how armor piercing works, but I really think what it does is essentially inverts defense in terms of the math, so that the higher their defense stat, the higher the actual damage quotient. This has the higher listed damage of the two, I think. We'll see as we go further in there. But the armor piercing means that you need to pick your target. This is a tank buster. Put bleed on the guy who's protecting, and then slap him with this, and watch him go down. This, if you're, and I'll go into this a little bit with the builds towards the end. I consider this to be a truly viable finishing move all the way up to 3-star and beyond. If your team is lacking a blaster, not everybody's team is going to have a blaster. My team last season didn't have a blaster. But this is a way to get around high defense bruisers if you don't have a blaster, as well as like tough scrappers and certain high defense tacticians. This move is going to cause a world of pain to Civil War Iron Man. And I really, right now he's considered part of the meta. This move will really hurt him a lot. Vibranium Mesh. This is the second of the lesser lockout moves. This one is tactical. Now, this move lacks the attack tag. This is a pure debuff. This has, of course, different connotations on what will happen when you use this move. It should not break stealth on Black Panther if you've given him the Veil de-ISO set. He does have one move that'll put him into stealth later. This can be used after that, of course. It typically, sometimes they can be protected against, sometimes they can't. The big thing is they often don't set off free attacks. They can't be dodged. So you're guaranteed to stick this to your target. This move is going to be the bane of characters like Wasp. Now, it does have a 2-turn cooldown and a 50 stamina cost. 3-star, 25 stamina. Well, again, straight to 3-star. Get it to that 25 stamina. Any ability that we can get below 40 makes our life easier when we're dealing with those 70 stamina cost damage bursts. Its speed does start normal, but it gets to fast very quickly and gets to very fast if you take it all the way to 4-star. I'm not sure that this one is worth 4-starring because it doesn't deal damage. But if you want that extra edge and you find that you have the AP, take it to 4-star, get it to very fast. Otherwise, probably perfectly fine at 3-star. Jammed and Distracted. 100%. This is rare. Most of his abilities are cap at 80%. This is a great candidate for the experimental EISO set. And we'll see that as we get over to the... I'll cover EISOs even if I can't bring up that page. I'll cover the ISOs even if I can't get back to the page. The equipable ISOs. Jammed and Distracted. Distracted, always a fantastic mental debuff. But Jammed is what we're really here for. Non-attack actions. This is an example of a non-attack action. Reduces the status chance by 75%. We had a preview of this with Civil War Iron Man and his Entangler, which could do the same thing. Reduce the chance of applying status effects by 50%, although it applied to all of them. Moves like Queen Bee, Drone Swarm, Recharge, that most wasps bring into PvP will have their application chance reduced down to 25%. 25% chance to apply alerted, 25% chance to apply protected, 25% chance to apply weakened or intimidated or inspired. It's a severe hit to survival or buffing and debuffing moves. Because it specifies non-attack actions, I do not believe that it will affect all status effects the way that Iron Man's Entangler does. So if it's something like Provoking Strike that grants protection but also deals damage, I don't think it will do anything to the protection on that. I call this one a minor lockout because just like the one that reduces free attack damage, this one is very specific. Not everybody uses free attacks. Many do, but not everyone makes heavy use of them. Not everyone makes heavy use of buff and debuff type moves, and that's really what this is designed to counter. It's also kind of interesting to me because Jammed and Distracted are completely separate. Jammed only works on moves that don't have an attack, that don't cause any kind of damage. Where Distracted only works on only is triggered by moves that cause damage. Uh, Buff and debuff moves, moves like Queen Bee, will not trigger Distracted. So what you have here is you're actually covering both your bases. If they try any move that doesn't deal damage, Jammed is going to kick in, and if because of Jammed they try to attack you, then Distracted is going to kick in. I expect this to be a great one to tag Waspa with that will just really irritate her overall. Panther's Leap. It's a stun. Unlike a lot of his other moves, this one has nothing new going for it. Stun and neutralized. Low damage. Has a small cooldown. The cooldown gets better. It does at 4-star go down to 1. It does drop its cost to 25, but its damage is always terrible, and it's always normal speed. It's unarmed, so it doesn't benefit from bleeding. It doesn't really synergize with the rest of his kit that well. Stun is fantastic in its own right. There's never really a true downside to stun. It's a wonderful debuff to hit somebody with. If somebody else on your team brings it, skip this. If you really need it, slot it in somewhere. But there are other characters who I think carry the stun better. So this move is, to me, a little bit lackluster considering the unique overall kit that he brings with the rest of his moves. This is a move that is not in any way, shape, or form unique, and other people can give you the same thing without limiting his options. Looking into the 2-star abilities now, we see the first of the 2 major lockout moves. Warrior King. This is his other. This is the second of 3 unarmed moves. Slow and 50 stamina. It does speed up. Normal speed is okay. Fast speed is better. This becomes the only lockout move that at 4-star has a damage that's okay for its speed. It is the only one that gets that far, but its stamina cost never drops below 50 ever. And that matters. That has an effect. It means that we can't spam this to quite the same extent. You could potentially use this 3 times in a row, tagging the entire enemy line, and then have 70 stamina left for your insight turn, but then you'll be at 0. And unless you were bringing another move that costs you 25 stamina, you're going to have to resort to your tactical to build your stamina back up. That's less of a problem with Civil War Black Panther. He's got a good tactical. But you've still got to resort to it there. This is not a move that can be spammed, indefinitely. Slowed. Slowed is always good. I like slowed. It is a good counter to fast light characters whose damage comes because of their high rate of speed. It is a physical debuff. He does benefit from physical debuffs, but it is worn off the next time that opponent gets a turn. So this only matters if he gets his turn before that opponent gets, if he gets his next turn before the opponent gets one. And that doesn't happen very often. Instead, we're looking at this because of Disoriented. This is another mental lockout debuff. This one reduces accuracy of range attacks by 75%. As always, only one lockout status can be applied at a time. I am fairly certain that what that really means is that if you try to apply a new lockout status, it'll override the old one. I think that there's a low chance, but it's possible. I just don't think it's likely that having a lockout status on the enemy will cause all new lockout statuses to simply not stick, and you'll have to wait until the very first one wears off. I think it's more likely they're just going to override each other. Accuracy for range attacks is major. Most characters that rely heavily on range attacks are characters who are blasters, tacticians, maybe some infiltrators, but accuracy-based range attacks are fairly common. Projectile users are hit very hard by this because the targeted debuff requires them to crit in order to successfully gain the 25% bonus damage. Now, while targeted does give a 25% accuracy increase, this results in an accuracy penalty. Targeted plus confident, or targeted plus, wide open on yourself, this reduces their accuracy even beyond what those do. In order for the opponent to have an actual accuracy increase, they need to have targeted and focused and either confident or wide open. Anywhere from 2 to 3 buffs/debuffs just to counter the accuracy loss from disoriented. This is very much hitting range attacks where it hurts. The fourth and final lockout move, the second of the major lockout moves, this is Piercing Dagger. We're going to throw another knife at him because that's kind of what Civil War Black Panther does. Ranged, sharp. He doesn't exactly have a lot of range moves, but this one does count. Starts at 60 stamina. That one's a bit high. Does start at normal speed. The speed is not what gets faster on this one, unlike Warrior King. In this case, it's the stamina that gets better. Now, what we'll probably find, due to how hard it is to farm large amounts of AP right now, between this and Warrior King, at 3-star, they're about equal. At 3-star, they're both normal speed, and they are both 50 stamina. And what we might see is that the major lockouts we keep at about 50 stamina and call it good. And then the minor lockouts, the major lockouts stay at 50 stamina and normal speed. The minor lockouts we try to get up to a fast speed, and we try to get those down to 25 because those can be the filler, especially that very first one he had. This one has Shield Breaker. Shield Breaker, always amazing. It's somewhat situational, but this is a PvP character. It's a PvP reward character who's going to be built with PvP in mind and who people are always going to associate with PvP. Shields pop up everywhere. So Shield Breaker is excellent. Enfeebled is the only physical lockout debuff, so his other moves that benefit from physical will benefit from this. It reduces the damage of melee attacks flat by 75%. Now, because it doesn't reduce their accuracy, they can still land critical hits and devastating blows. This is very powerful. There's no other way to put it. This is strong. If you're having problems with Angela, sniper with a dagger, and there's no way that she's going to kill you with her impetuous cleave anymore. It's just a 75% damage drop is huge. It really is. Strengthened plus confident is a 65% damage increase. That's still a loss. And you would need both of those just to get past this. You'd need to have confident and rampaging at the same time in order to actually have a bonus higher than the penalty imposed by this lockout. However, as we've gotten to this point, there are 4 lockout moves. You can't bring all of them. And as we get past, we'll do a little discussion on the ISO slots and what sets I feel are good for him. But when I get into the abilities, I'll get into the potential build kind of ideas. I'll really talk about how to pick and choose between these and what I feel you need to keep in mind when you do. Because the abilities themselves are very equivalent. 3-star here is normal speed, 50 stamina, 109 damage, unarmed. Versus 3-star here, normal speed, 50 damage, 50 stamina, 88 damage, but it's sharp and so triggers bleeding. These are very, very equal abilities, so it comes down to often making a choice. Let's look at his last 2 abilities before we go anything further there. Panther's Pounce. This is kind of an oddball one and actually has what I think is a visual bug, and that we see the stamina cost twice. I don't think it costs you 60 stamina across 2 different turns. And I say that because it only has 1 damage rating. If an ability goes for multiple turns, like I believe the Fermium Pulse Rifle from Rocket, as well as War Machine, has an ability that does that. You actually see multiple damage ratings divided by commas that indicate multiple shots. This one, I think that's just a typo. Melee, sharp, slow, 60 stamina, not 70. High damage, has a cooldown. Ambushing puts you into stealth. This is kind of a setup move, and generally speaking, I don't. I saw a use for this, and I did, and I put it in the post that'll go up alongside this video, and I'll cover it as I go into the builds. In general, this would not be your insight turn damage burst, because I have the feeling that as soon as you activate the ambush, it'll throw everything off. What really worries me is the fact that this is ambushing on an insight using character, and I have no idea how ambushing will interact with bonus turns. It's possible characters who have delayed moves who get a bonus turn actually interrupt the delayed move. I'm hoping that that doesn't count with ambushing. I'm hoping instead that it does kind of the thing that some other characters do, where what used to happen kind of with the insight bug would cause your bonus turn from insight to delay and trigger off your next turn instead of your current turn when it first fills. So what I'm hoping is that if your insight fills while he's in the ambushing status, that once the ambushing comes out, he immediately gets a bonus turn right then and there, which would be the best possible outcome. But there's a lot of a chance for there to be a bug between the interactions there. So I'm leery about this move until we've had a chance to test it, and I did not include it in what I view as his primary build. This is also his only way to enter stealth. He does not have any stealthy maneuvers. Stealth is... it's kind of a token nod. He's kind of like Gamora that way, where stealth is just not really his thing. He's here for utility and for debuffs. And stealth can be fun, but yeah, if you really want stealth, give him Veiled. Raking Claw. His 3-star move. This is the reward for S rank, I believe. Because all this is done on Windows 10, there's a bug on Windows 10. I can't see the PvP rewards. I'm going to assume that, like normal, this is our S rank reward. Those of you who got rank 5 and above who get the character anyway, you can still draw this from the canisters, as well as buying it with AP. S rank just gets it to you for free. Mighty Maneuver and Exploit Weakness. Now, his other 70 point... again, similarities here. 70 stamina, melee, sharp, slow. His other move for this also had Exploit Weakness, but it's trading out Armor Piercing for Mighty Maneuver. Mighty Maneuver means that if you take an extra round to buff Black Panther, then he can use Raking Claw against any target. Against a tank, Armor Piercing will do better. Against anybody who's not a tank, I believe Raking Claw will be the higher of the two moves. But only if you set up the physical buff. If an opponent has stripped physical buffs off of you, this is going to be the weaker move of the two. You've got to be able to maintain a physical debuff and a physical buff to make the most out of this. But 338, even just the starting 270, is an impressive amount. You're already talking 500 just off this, but you're also talking another 50% or so because of his Insight passive. This is a move you would fire off during that bonus turn and get that 50% bonus damage. 50% on this base means that the final value on this is like a 650, probably close to a 700 point damage rating move, just even when it's launched. As it goes up to there and goes from 270 to 338, you're going to start hitting the realms of 800 or even 900 damage. This is going to really hurt. It's going to be a high damage burst, and it's going to be designed for that purpose. This is not a move that I would use during normal turns. I would save this for the Insight bonus turn, unless you really think that you can get a kill shot with it. And I say that because of that 70 stamina cost. The math behind stamina with 40 per turn is that you can use 70 stamina moves back to back, and then you're at 0. Starting at 100, 2 of these will put you at 0. So if you're using his other moves that cost him 25 per round, he's really only recovering 15 at a time, and it would take him 5 turns to build back up the 75 stamina or so needed to use this again. So you may find that you end up having to use his tactical bioamplification. Like all stamina users, he has a very fast tactical. It does not, unlike, say, Agent 13, actually grant him any insight. It's used to regenerate stamina. It's also probably one of my favorite tacticals for a stamina user. Inspired and Strengthened are fantastic buffs. They have a very long duration. One is the physical buff that he needs to make use of his 3-star ability. Inspired is a great bonus to everything. These are good, solid core buffs on a very fast move that lets him regen his stamina. I wouldn't launch this on the first round of combat unless you're starting Veiled, and you're really trying to get your strength. If you're trying to get the strength and buffed early, go for it. But otherwise, weave this in here and there to kind of get some extra stamina regen. If you use this before, like if your insight is sitting at about 90, use this. Because the next time an enemy attacks, you're going to get an insight turn. And this doesn't cost you any stamina. Even Woven Vibranium, his debuff move, costs him stamina. All of his actions cost it, except for this. So he can use this right before an insight turn to gain 40 stamina for this turn and 40 stamina for the bonus turn, and makes sure that he has the 80 stamina needed, at minimum 80 stamina, to use that big damage burst on his insight turn. It's something of a setup move. Very strong, 35% bonus to attack, 10% bonus to everything else. Good, solid, tactical. I'm happy to see it. Now his innate, the Kimoyo tracking. This is going to be interesting. This has team synergy written all over it. Civil War Black Panther is all about single target attacks. Additional insight when an enemy with a physical debuff attacks, that is highly useful. It gives him more bonus turns than other insight users will get, but it relies on physical debuffs being spread across the enemy line. Make sure that your team has the ability to do this. Bleeding is a physical debuff. Enfeebled is a physical debuff. Slowed is technically a physical debuff, but it's going to wear off the next time an opponent gets a turn, so you can't rely on it. But there are definitely other physical debuffs. Wide Open is one of them. Crushed, I believe, is. Clobbered, I think, is tactical, but Crushed is a physical debuff. There are several of them floating around. Weakened should be physical debuff. Spread those along the enemy line, and every time the enemy attacks, you're going to get more turns here. A great potential partner because of this is Wasp. Now, I expect Wasp to have some utility dropping just because I think a lot of people are going to field Black Panther, but Wasp's Drone Swarm, applying Weaken to the enemy line, will immediately put a physical debuff on all 3 enemies, setting him up for this, where he can then turn around and pick the enemy with the ranged attackers with the high accuracy, those blasters who actually can rip through Wasp like Hawkeye, and he can put drop their accuracy with Warrior King. So again, this has team synergy written all over it that, if done right, will result in Civil War Black Panther getting more bonus turns than other characters who use Insight. He doesn't regenerate stamina during the bonus turn. I just went over all of that talk on why the stamina regen is so important, because he's going to get more of those big damage burst rounds. You're going to want to make sure that he has 70 stamina available to him as often as possible, because he's going to find uses for it more frequently than other characters do. Now, I can click on this over here all I want. We're not going to see his actual slots. I'm going to go back to the profile page and use this to draw some conclusions. He is an infiltrator. with high speed, high accuracy. I'm expecting at least 2 speed slots. I'm expecting at least 1 accuracy slot, probably more. Evasion will almost certainly be his ISO slot color of choice. He'll probably have 1, if not 2, evasion slots. Red attack slots are not necessarily that common among infiltrators. Many of them just don't have any at all. I would not be surprised if he has 1. I would be very surprised if he has more than 1. Defense and health are low. I kind of expect him to have 1 of them. Like 1 health or 1 defense, but not both. And actually, because his defense is slightly higher than his health, I actually expect him to have a health one, so that he ends up with 2 low stats instead of 1 that's average and 1 that's very low. I expect both of these to be fairly low, all things said and done. This is a debuff-based character. Accuracy is important to him. He needs to be able to stick those debuffs. Woven Vibranium, as a debuff move with a 100% chance for the debuffs, is really his only way. It's his only move where he can guarantee that the debuffs are going to stick. Otherwise, he's got to land the shot. And for that, he needs accuracy. Speed, he's going to get it from the leader's bonus if you put him there. He's also just got it fairly high. I expect it on his slots. Speed, probably a pretty big deal for him. The question comes, how much do you want to weight attack? And I say, focus on it. If between these 2 stats he has, if he has at least 2 of each of these, then my suggestion would be take speed, a speed crystal, and look for attack on it, and then look for accuracy as the third, and take an accuracy crystal and look for attack on it, and then take speed as the third. I will put attack as his second highest one because he's going to have these big damage burst turns, and he's not neglecting his damage dealing capabilities if you build him that way. Now, if you build him purely for the debuff side of him, you can probably neglect his attack, because all of those lockout moves tend to be pretty weak. It's his studied strikes passive that makes me not want to neglect his attack. He is there to deal damage. He gets a little bit of a benefit, though, in that all of those moves that deal damage do so with a multiplying percentage. Instead of just having a high base damage that is then modified by his attack, it has a good base damage modified by his attack that is then multiplied by a percentage. And that means that any boost to his attack is going to essentially give him more benefit. If a move has 700 damage and then, gains the benefit of his attack stat in order to determine the damage it deals, and another move has 350 damage that then benefits from his attack stat, but is then doubled by having the plus 100%, you get more from the attack. So, don't neglect his attack stat. You might see that it results in the damage numbers climbing very rapidly. Evasion will probably be your defensive stat of choice, but this is a character who's going to base his survival on his defensive ISO sets. Unless his free attack, which obviously we have no way to test for the next couple days until he actually is released, unless his free attack applies a status effect. And maybe it'll apply bleeding. That would be awesome. It would be great if it did. Unless it does, coordinated is probably very bad for this character. He is going to be really based heavily for PvP, not PvE. And you're going to want to make use of the experimental ISO set. ISO set. Eventually I'll get over that. You're going to want to make use of the experimental set. He has a lot of abilities, especially a lot of lockouts that are starting at... They start at 80%, but they never make it to 100. You need the experimental set on Civil War Black Panther to make the most of those unique debuffs that are the whole reason you're bringing him in the first place. He's there for utility, and he needs that set to do it. Coordinated really limits his options if you try to take up 6 slots with that. It's just, I would skip the whole free attack thing with this particular character. I also think that he's going to really alter free attack teams in general, just because his best filler move also reduces free attack damage dealt. We may find that free attacks in general become notoriously weaker, because you'll never be certain if you're fighting a Black Panther or not. I think that he's going to really alter the scale of the game, and just kind of the general layout of it. And I'll touch on that in the final thoughts as well. And that's one of the reasons that I think he's going to do it. Because he's a threat just by existing. You never know if you're going to encounter him. But there's always that possibility. And it's really probably going to be a pretty high possibility. Experimental, not coordinated. Veiled is not bad. In PvP, Veiled is great for that opening round, especially if you give him Woven Vibranium or you open up with his Tactical, neither of which should break Stealth. So Veiled, not bad. Impenetrable, he doesn't have high health. He's not going to have high health. He's not going to have high defense. Impenetrable is really only going to help him through the first shot, but in PvP, if you use him as a PvP character, that first shot is important. So, Impenetrable, if you're going to use him as a PvP hero, don't neglect it. Barricading for much the same reason. Low health characters make pretty good use of Rejuvenation, but Rejuvenation is probably better left in the hands of tanks who can vastly reduce the damage they take in the first place. Instead of Rejuvenation, I would probably give him the Indomitable set to kind of give him debuff resistance. The last thing that you want is for Black Panther to be tagged with anything that lowers his accuracy especially. He is there to apply debuffs, and he needs to hit to do it. So Indomitable probably will have a very strong effect for him. Ideally, and the way that I think that I will build him up myself, is Experimental, Indomitable, Barricading, and Impenetrable. Because of his passive, Alert, and is it whatever the one that allows you to bypass Protecting, Unstoppable, I think. Those sets are optional. If he's going to get more bonus turns than other people, and during those bonus turns he ignores Stealthy and Protected anyway, those sets lose a lot of their real benefit. If you're going to take one of them, take the Unstoppable set, or whatever it's called, and bypass Protection. Don't worry too much about Stealth, because it only tends to last for a turn or so. I don't think Alert is as good for him as it could be for other characters. I do think the ability to bypass Protect isn't a bad one, because it lets you put the debuffs where you want them, as opposed to worrying about taking out the enemy's tank. But with that second 1-star ability of his and its armor-piercing capability, he has the ability to simply kill the enemy tank, and then bypass them that way. I'm going to skip both of those sets on this character when I make him. I haven't decided what team I'm going to use with him yet, but I'm still going to skip both of those sets. So those are my thoughts on potential ISO slots for him, what I expect the slot colors to be, and what sets I plan to use for him. Looking back at potential builds, there are two main ways that I'm thinking of for him, and one of them is very temporary. It is built for his trials. This is a character who starts at 1 star and will have to work his way all the way up to 4, and it will take a little bit. We've already seen, and it's inevitable, that he's going to have kill trials. He's going to have to deal the finishing blow. And his lockout moves just don't do a lot of damage. So even though it's the second build on the post, I'm going to kind of cover it real quick. But you can potentially chain either Lethal Scratch or Panther's Leap as your 25 stamina kind of just opening. And then we're going to make use of Panther's Pounce and Raking Claw as your second and third. And what we're doing here is ignoring the lockout moves in favor of bleeding and then two high damage moves. Panther's Pounce actually has the highest listed damage of any of them, although it's not really multiplied like the others are. But it's still a high damage move. Make use of his Tactical to get the Strength and the Inspired, and then use that little chain of those three there together. This ignores the lockout that makes him unique, but increases his personal damage so that you can better clear his trials. I think I called it something like his little inner beast thing. It's all about his actual personal combat. It's kind of the irrelevant build. It's really just there to kind of make starring him up easier before you take him back into PvP and use his crowd control build. Here we are looking at, and my suggestion, Look at your team composition. I cannot stress this enough. If you're going to use them in PvE for this, and there will probably be times coming up where we'll want to use them in PvE to shut down a specific boss in a specific way. Um, but look at what in PvE. Look at your opponent. You know, in PvE, you know the opponent you're going to face. Going up against Epic Graviton, worried about that shield of his, bring Woven Vibranium, and 75% chance to not apply a shield to himself. Use it, mix that with one of his other moves for Shield Breaker, and use that to shut Epic Graviton down. Um, so in PvE, look at your opponent. In PvP, look at your team. I cannot stress this enough. Look at your team and be realistic about your weaknesses. He's an infiltrator. Are you bringing a bruiser? Because if you're bringing the infiltrator, tactician, blaster kind of chain, or even just a scrapper in there, Angela right now hurts. And you need to make sure that you're countering her. Melee attack, free attackers, things like that. Iron Fist and several other scrappers will, like Spider-Man, they hurt. They hurt a lot. Build your team for that. Those are melee attackers. So make use of that. If, on the other hand, you did like I did, where my team had 2 characters running Veiled, and then Moon Knight, who was not, and that funneled opening shots towards Moon Knight. 9 times out of 10, most of my opponents, pretty much unless they were Daredevil, even the ones who ran alerted, would often actually go for Moon Knight first. He was there, he was visible, I didn't even have to run Protect on him, they still went for him. And that meant that blasters who got a good solid early opening round could really hurt. Ranged was the weakness for my team. Looking at a crowd control build for him, I would look at one of these 2, either Lethal Scratch or Woven Vibranium, bring one of the 2 minor lockouts and one of the 2 major lockouts. If your team has tacticians and you're not that worried about ranged blasters because you're going to get the stat bonus against them anyway, don't worry about bringing the one that lowers their accuracy. That's okay. You don't really need it. Worry about those hard-hitting infiltrators like Daredevil. Worry about Spider-Man's Jumping Spider or Angela's Impetuous Cleave. If you're going to do that, bring his little dagger toss over here. Bring Piercing Dagger and aim to use Enfeebled. If you're worried about ranged blasters, bring Warrior King and throw Disoriented at them. That's what I would use with my team right now. Bring one of these 2, and then one of these 2, and then bring either Raking Claw or Cloaked Ambush as your bonus round massive damage burst, where after weakening the enemy's biggest threat, you try to use this to kill off one of the other targets. Angela, with her melee damage reduced by 25%, by 75%, is not nearly that scary as she could be. As soon as she's tagged with that, you can effectively ignore her and move on to the next individual. Most characters who are running Angela right now, the way they force her to use Impetuous Cleave is to bring 2 other abilities with a high spirit cost, so that she can't use them on the first round, and thus chains Impetuous Cleave. Impetuous Cleave has a slow speed, and that never gets better. It's a slow move. If it doesn't get the bonus turn from Opportunistic, she's not getting another turn for a little while. Tag her once with Piercing Dagger, and then spend your time with your bonus turns killing off the other people. Then come back to her. My thoughts on Black Panther, Civil War Black Panther, my final thoughts is that he is a game-changing hero because of his presence in 2 ways. The first is the PvP meta. If everybody is using the same handful of characters and 75% of those characters are using ranged or melee attacks, you're going to see Civil War Black Panther pop up and limit that. Characters who have invested heavily in Angela, Rocket, Spider-Man, meta game characters where they've invested so much into one character they've ignored their others, are going to really suffer in the next PvP season when people build up Black Panther, because he's going to limit, merely by existing, he throws off the balance of relying on just one major damage dealing hero. My current team would probably fare decently against him because I have a ranged hero and I have a melee hero who use completely different styles of attacks. And only one of the two really makes heavy use of free attacks. They both have them, but only one of them is really dependent on them. And this means that Civil War Black Panther would have to cover multiple bases with his Lockout moves in order to effectively neutralize my current team. But that's because I've been playing for a little while and have a fairly well-rounded one. People who have built up a melee, like the team that I had last season, where everything was about melee, and I was using Age of Ultron Black Widow to buff the entire team's melee capabilities. Civil War Black Panther built to limit melee would shut my entire team down. 75% damage loss to everybody, and there would be nothing I could do about it. Merely by existing, the threat of running into a Civil War Black Panther will force, in a lot of ways, will force people who might not otherwise have to diversify their teams. If enough and I think that there will be a natural equilibrium to this. He's going to be new. A lot of people are going to build him up because they're going to be excited to try him. And so because of this, there's going to be a lot of him running around. So people will have to diversify their teams because they know they're going to inevitably fight him. If he falls out of favor, if we find that he's not as effective because all the teams have diversified, then we'll find that the teams stop diversifying. If you're not running into Civil War Black Panther, why would you build a team designed to get around, to stop him from countering you? And at that point, he'll become viable again. And so I think that there's going to be a definite effect on the game as it tries to find and reach that new equilibrium between how diverse can you make your team versus team synergy, and the threat of running into Black Panther versus actually how often we see him. So that's how I think his existence changes the PvP meta. I also want to note that he changes the game as a whole because of this right here. Not because of the effect of a lockout move, but because there is a new tag in the game. Other buffs and debuffs that have been added to the game, other Civil War characters added new buffs and debuffs, things that didn't exist before. But they were all categorized under existing tags, which means that moves that cleansed them, cleared them, prevented them, affected them, were all, they existed. They were already there. This one can still be cleared by anything that clears a mental thing, but the fact that it has a lockout tag establishes a precedent. Now we can know that Playdom will add new tags in order to suit new types of abilities, that they do not feel that they are locked into what they already have. This, while it's a minor change, and not really that big of a deal because in and of its own right, because again, this is still a mental debuff and can still be prevented because it's a mental debuff and can be removed. This still establishes the precedent that that things in the future are not necessarily set in stone, that the tags we have now are not always the only tags we will have, and that things can be added to the game that are well and truly new, that even all the way down to their basic mechanics are just, they're new. And that gives a lot of hope for future expansions. My thoughts on Civil War Black Panther as a single individual hero: I think he is extremely interesting. I was less than impressed with Nova after I got the chance to actually try him. He's a little bit awkward to use. He's not bad, but he's a little bit awkward to use. You really kind of have to mess with his abilities, and there's not as much synergy as I hoped. Agent 13 definitely has some uses. She was part of my PvP team this season, took me all the way to S rank, can't complain. And I was happy to see that she turned out really well. Civil War Black Panther, I think, is going to be a lot like that. He, like Agent 13, he is a utility character who is there for the unique debuffs that he brings. If you're looking for a damage dealing infiltrator, there are plenty of other options. Daredevil is probably the current top, but Marvel Now Black Panther is actually a really good burst damage dealer in his own right. But this is a character who brings utility while without neglecting his damage burst. So my suggestion: bring a minor lockout, bring a major lockout, bring a damage burst move. Set him loose in PvP. I'm excited. 2 days, we'll have him. I have already kind of stockpiled. I've stockpiled everything I need to take him to level 30 within minutes of his release. And of course, then I'll have to go through and spend I don't know how much building up his stars and his trials and all that. But I want to see him in practice. I want to see how he goes. And yeah, let's. I'll come back in just a couple days here, and we'll do a follow-up video for this, where we've actually had the chance to play him and test him and find out if he's bugged, because that's still a distinct possibility. I have, and just as kind of a preview for the next little bit, I have got Mr. Hyde up to level 30, 3-star. I've tested him out. I've played through him some, and I do plan to do a video on him. We really only have 2 days left in the season. I'm going to see if maybe tomorrow morning, I don't work until tomorrow night for once. Thank you. I may try to do a Mr. Hyde video right tomorrow morning early on, and that way I can have these two new characters out of the way before Captain America 1901 and Deathlock get added to the list, because we needed another Captain America to add it to the team. But I will say I'm glad this one is going to have a task line, which means that we can get him and then put him to the side and not worry about it. He's not going to be in the random draw pool, at least not from the start. Probably not ever. He'll probably be a restricted character that way down the line. So yes, it's another Captain America, but I like what they've done with the variant so far. So here I was, gone for a week and a half, gone for 2 weeks, however long it's actually been, and they've thrown 4 new characters for me to do videos on before I can get back to that long backlog of the characters I haven't touched yet. I'm going to save my voice because I'm going to be talking during these videos for the next little while. So until the Mr. Hyde video, hopefully tomorrow, I make no promises. This is I, Hoagland. I am back, but I'm also out.